So I think we are good to kick off. So again, thank you everyone for joining. This session today, we're going to be talking about how to integrate, automate, and optimize your API lifecycle. And we're going to specifically use the context of some recent enhancements that we've made to our product SwaggerHub, specifically around the way that Git workflows and our Git integrations work, as well as a brand new SwaggerHub CLI tool. And presenting today is going to be Stephen Mizell, who is a director of product management here at SmartBear, and he focuses specifically on SwaggerHub. Just to set some context for folks who maybe know SwaggerHub but might not know SmartBear. SmartBear is the company behind SwaggerHub and a lot of other products. So we have almost 7 million users around the world. SmartBear really is a software quality tools company for development teams or testing teams who are looking to make sure that they're releasing high quality releases in an efficient way. SmartBear has a whole sort of portfolio of tools that help out with specific use cases. So you don't need one big monolithic solution, but really whatever you're trying to solve for, SmartBear has a tool that can help you with your testing, your design, your test management. Which I think there's some on the next slide. Yep. So this kind of gives a rough lay of the land. A lot of people know us for our open source communities that we support. Obviously Swagger, we're the main supporter of that open source community. Also Soap UI, and then recently Cucumber. So a lot of people also know tools like Zephyr, really great for test management if you're using Jira. Test Complete if you're trying to do UI testing, or Collaborator if you're trying to do code and document review. So there's a whole bunch of tools. Appreciate everyone sitting through a quick plug there. And before we fully kick off, a couple points of housekeeping. This session will be recorded. So we will be sending out the recording after the session. So if you want to rewind on anything or share it out with your teammates, feel free to do that. And then if you have questions at any point as we're going through the presentation, feel free to put those into the Q&A box. Ideally not the chat, because if you put a question into the chat, there's no way that we sort of have a record of that after the session. And we'd love to make sure that we can follow up and make sure that we get that question answered. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Stephen.
Great. Thanks a lot, Patrick. My name is Stephen Mizell. As Patrick said, I am a director of product management here at SmartBear, work on SwaggerHub, and I'm excited to talk to you today about some of our recent changes, some of our what we've just released, and we're going to talk about it in the context of an API strategy, because that's really the world that we're speaking to here with these changes. So the agenda today is to look at what is an API strategy, what do we have new at SwaggerHub, and then we'll have a demo time toward the end of this and finish up with some Q&A. So make sure we leave enough time at the end for that. So just to briefly mention what we've released, so you have an idea, is that for one, we've created a new CLI tool. CLI tool is really geared toward the CI/CD experience, being able to automate around SwaggerHub in a build pipeline. And then we've also enhanced some of our Git integrations to improve that workflow within SwaggerHub. And this is all to make it easier to implement, to use an API strategy across your entire company, and to automate across your entire company. So in this context, what is an API strategy? When we talk about this, what does it mean? Kind of briefly put, an API strategy consists of processes, tools, services and best practices that teams follow in order to build consistent quality APIs at scale. The problem that an API strategy is trying to solve is it's working to get an entire organization to unify the way that they interact with other teams, the way that they interact with the outside world. And it's a way that teams build and use APIs. One of the key parts here is that companies decide to make APIs as part of their overall strategy. And to make that succeed, they need a strong API strategy in place. When we say consistent here, it really means that APIs across the company have a consistent feel to them. They use consistent patterns, they use consistent words. It's sometimes obvious if you come across a whole list of APIs that use a completely different way of building and designing their APIs. So the API strategy is there to kind of help people and guide people down the same path. And of course, quality is important. Quality is a user expects a certain level of quality when they come across an API. And so an API strategy can help give that baseline and also help guide people toward that level of quality. The API strategy itself is part of a much broader idea, which is digital transformation. As companies start to integrate technology more in their companies, they start to realize that the API is one of the most important parts, whether it's giving vendors access or just providing ways for teams to interact and ensuring that teams can work together over the long haul. And so the companies see that technology is important. Every company feels these days as they're becoming a software company, and with APIs being a key part of that, APIs become one of the main drivers of a digital transformation. But as we talk about API strategy as well, as we talk about processes and tools, one of the most important things to mention here is that an API strategy is only successful if it's the people involved that make it successful. It's making sure that leadership has buy-in, that this is the right approach, that the API strategy is an important part of the business success, that individuals, developers, teams also buy into it, that they're not against the idea of having a broad API strategy, but they see the value in it and they're on board with it. And of course, there needs to be a culture of sharing knowledge. There needs to be a culture of mentoring. And it's important for companies to cultivate that. It's just as important as the tools and the processes that these companies use. So all in all, the API strategy, having some consistent way to build, consume APIs, it's not something that you do and then you finish. It's not a project that happens in the first quarter and then you implement it the second quarter of a year. It's a project that's ongoing. It's a complete change in how you build and deliver software. So it's something that you're always going to be working at. You're always going to be finding ways to optimize your strategy and to think through it. You'll find ways that didn't work, find ways that did, and it's going to be something that's always something you're working towards. To do this at scale, though, to do an API strategy well across the globe, across many time zones, many teams, maybe hundreds, thousands of APIs for some people, it can't be an individual or a group of individuals that make the API strategy work. You need tools and processes, and you need everything to be integrated in a way that you can use your tools and you can make sure that all of the tools are on the same page, using the same strategy. And additionally, you need to make sure that automation is there so that the rules that you use, the standards, the style guides, they're done in a way that can be automatically applied at different phases of the development lifecycle, so that it doesn't have to be individuals that do it. It can be software, it can be tools, it can be something that happens at design time or build time. So API strategy, of course, requires people, it requires tools and services, and of course, it requires this broad idea of integration and automation. So as we look at an API strategy, how can SwaggerHub help? What are the tools we provide? What are the things that we do that make an API strategy easier for you? So we kind of focus under this idea of integrate, automate, and optimize. SwaggerHub itself provides lots of different features. We specifically help with the API design process. We give you a nice editor. We give you the ability to collaborate around any API design changes, around an OpenAPI document. We provide some nice standardization tools to make sure that anytime an API definition is modified, that it conforms with the standards of the entire organization. We provide a central catalog for a place for you to store all of your API definitions across your company, which helps with discovery, helps with reusability. We provide a single place to manage access to all of those. And we provide lots of integration tools for you to integrate your development process and your design process. And now with the CLI tool, we're starting to think about how can we help automate some of these things. So really two different areas, integrating and automating. You can use SwaggerHub integrations to integrate with your Git repositories and API management tools, and you can use the SwaggerHub CLI to automate some of your CI/CD workflows. When we talk about integration and automation, when do these things happen for a company? When is it important for an API strategy to integrate and automate things? A lot of times for companies, they've defined a process for starting any new API project. And that may include setting up a gateway, setting up part of a build pipeline, creating a new Git repository, all of the things that you don't want people to have to do manually. You want somebody can say, we're ready for a new project and kick it off, and everything is there and ready for them to start designing and developing. That's a really easy place to start finding ways to automate and improving that process. Applying standardization, of course, this is where you come up with rules that state what can and cannot go into your API definition. For example, you may say that this schemas within your OpenAPI document must also have examples with them. And you can apply that rule across all of your API definitions. And that can be done at design time when you're actually writing the OpenAPI definition, or it can be done at build time to ensure that any API definition and any API change as far as the code is going to be built according to the standards. Kind of one last check before deploying and pushing things out to production. It's important to have a way to integrate the design and the development processes. There's a gap that happens with the API design process where a team works and designs the change. Maybe they're adding something to an API, and then they need to get that information into the development world. How do they get the design over to the developers and in a way that they can start working? So the SwaggerHub integrations are an easy way to do that. You can make the changes, and then when you're ready, you can push those changes into the development lifecycle. Another common thing is for teams that are doing a more code-first approach, meaning they write their code and they annotate it, and then they generate an OpenAPI document from that code. They need to somehow get that OpenAPI definition into a central repository, into a central catalog of all the API definitions. And so this process can be automated as well. So they automate the process of building the document, and they automate the process of maybe updating a version or creating a new version within SwaggerHub. And then lastly, a really important piece is that you want to make sure that your documentation aligns with the API that's actually deployed. So as you deploy an API, you can make sure that the documentation is up to date, and that it is published for others to find and to see. And that can also be automated across the design and the development life cycles. So the process of getting the OpenAPI definition from the design phase into the development phase, we have several different nice tools that can help you. One is just getting it into your Git repositories. So we provide integrations with GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and Azure DevOps, so that as you make a change, you can create a commit and you can push that into your repository of choice. You can also push your definitions up into tools, API management tools like Azure API Management, AWS API Gateway, and Apigee Edge. And then important too for teams to interact and to work in parallel, for say a mobile team to interact with an API team. The API definition could be used as a contract, as a central place that you decide how those two teams interact, and then allow the mobile team to go off and use a mock server to start building their application without waiting on the API to be built. Lastly, another important piece of automation here is webhooks. So you can trigger webhooks based on different events within SwaggerHub. When someone saves an API definition, or when someone pushes it out, or someone publishes it. And this can be a nice addition to any automation workflow. So getting to the enhancements, the changes that we've just recently done. One is that every time you create a new version within SwaggerHub, if you're moving from 1.0.0 to 2.0.0 for your API definition, we copy over the Git integrations as you create these new versions, so that every version is also connected to your Git repository, which makes creating versions a lot easier. It reduces some of the friction there. Every time we create a new version, we also create a new branch that matches that version within your repository. And this keeps versions from stepping over each other, and it allows you to use a pull request process to merge that into the branch of your choice, whether it's your main branch or whether it's a release branch. As you're doing this, as you're pushing new versions into your Git repositories, you can add a custom commit message. Before it was hard coded, and now we're given the freedom to add some information about what you've changed during the API process, the design process. We've separated the ability to save and push. Before, the save button would do everything. It would save within SwaggerHub and push to your Git repo. And we wanted to make it to where we matched many people's Git workflows. So as you save within SwaggerHub, it's not pushed until your repository until you're ready for that. And additionally, you can pull those changes back out of the repository. I'll hit on the CLI tool. The CLI tool is meant for people to use in their build pipelines, and it can do a lot of the things that you would do within SwaggerHub. It uses our Registry API, which is the main SwaggerHub API that allows you to interact with your API definitions and lots of other things within SwaggerHub. You can create, update, delete APIs and the versions. You can do the same with domains. You can publish and unpublish. You can mark versions as defaults. And coming this year, we're going to be adding the ability to run standardizations through the CLI tool. I'm going to show some of this as well during the demo portion of this. What are some scenarios when you would use the CLI tool? Maybe if you're doing a code-first approach, like I mentioned before, and you want to create a new version or update an existing version, it's really easy to run a single command and push that into SwaggerHub. As you're deploying to production, maybe you want at that point to publish the version of your API. That's what we'll be showing today. And likewise, it's just a single command that you have to run in your build process. You can use, of course, like I said, code first to run your standardizations. So for instance, during build time, you can make sure that your standardization is run on any OpenAPI definition you build. And this ensures that the standardization is valuable for not just the design portion, but also in a design first approach, but also for the build portion in a code first approach. And lastly, during doing code reviews, it can prevent people from merging code that isn't built according to the standards. It can give feedback during that code review process in a pull request to make sure that your standardizations match. So I want to take a really quick look at what we'll be doing in the demo and how SwaggerHub fits into this design first, code first approach. One is, this is design first. This is kind of the workflow of pushing out into the development phase and then pushing things back into SwaggerHub. You start with an OpenAPI file, you make some updates. Step 2 would be use the Git integrations within SwaggerHub to push that into your Git provider. Maybe it's GitHub or Bitbucket. At that point, you may run some tests. You may check standardizations. You move on from there to a code review. If everything matches, if everything looks good, you merge that. You do a final test, and maybe you do your final deploy as well. And this is where on step 7, you publish that within SwaggerHub to make sure that your API definition and your documentation is in line with what's in production. This is the workflow we'll be looking at in the demo. I just quickly highlighted here where SwaggerHub fits in. You can kind of see it's not just the design portion of it, but it's each part of this life cycle to where it's the way that you integrate, it's part of your pipeline, and it's the way that you finish up and publish with the CLI tool. Governance, where can governance happen? Where can you apply your standardization? With the upcoming change to the CLI tool, you'll be able to do this during your build pipeline and during the design phase, just to kind of show that this can happen in multiple places, not just something that happens within SwaggerHub. I wanted to briefly show the code first approach too, that because a lot of times we think of it as something completely different than design first, but a lot of it can be the same. A lot of it can be very similar, to where the only main difference is instead of starting with an OpenAPI definition, the developer is writing and annotating code. And then at the end, they're going to push that generated OpenAPI into SwaggerHub. So SwaggerHub works well in a design first approach. It works well in a code first approach. And importantly, as you in your company start implementing an API strategy, it helps teams move from code first to design first if that's one of your goals. So I want to do a demo now. I want to show this design first approach. I also want to show the CLI tool and what it looks like. So let me jump out here. And we'll start with a quick look at the CLI. We have published this CLI tool on GitHub, and it's distributed also through NPM. It's a really easy process to get it installed. You need to have Node.js 10 or later, and you need to run a single command to get it installed. And when you do this, you'll have the SwaggerHub CLI tool there. Setup is just a couple of steps. If you're on premise, it's just one thing you need, or if you're using our SaaS product, it's just one item you need to add, which is the API key, which you can find in your settings within SwaggerHub. And if you're on premise, you can change the URL so that the CLI points at your on-premise instance. These are environment variables. These can be configured in your build service, build tool. If you're using this locally, you can also use this convenience tool, which is nice, of running SwaggerHub configure. It'll ask you for the information, and then it'll store that information into a file to reuse every time you run the tool. We've listed out all of the commands you can do. You can see that we do a lot of the common commands you would use during a build process. Maybe you're creating a new API or updating one. Maybe you're publishing something or setting it as default. These are probably common things you do. We'll be, of course, adding more as time goes on. And this is all pulled from the help portion of the CLI tool, which I'll show. So the Swagger, once you install it, you get a SwaggerHub command, which is just SwaggerHub. And everything that is here in the documentation is also available in the help. So you can use help to kind of give you information on how to use any part of the CLI tool. For instance, we'll look at SwaggerHub get, which is a way to pull down an API definition. And it gives you the information on what you need to pass in and other arguments or options you could use to pass in as well. I'll show a quick demo of this. I have a API here that's already set up. It is owned by SL Demo. It's called Webinar, and the version is 1.0.0. So what I'll do is I'll use this get command and pull this down. When I run this, it's going to pull down the YAML, the entire YAML file. I'll redirect this into a file so that we can edit it locally. I'll add a little blurb here in the description, and then we will push it back up. So I, of course, could have looked this up through the help. It's very similar to the get. The difference here is that I pass a file in. So that pushed it into SwaggerHub. If I refresh, you can see here now it says from my local computer. And you can do other commands. You can do publish and marking things as default. I want to show how this can also fit into a larger workflow. That's the one that I showed with the design first approach, where you start in SwaggerHub and then you push into your GitHub repository. You do some a merge there, and then you are able to publish that from within your build pipeline. So I've created a skeleton Git repository here, and I'm using their functionality called GitHub Actions. This is a build pipeline tool that they provide for you, and this is where we'll run the CLI tool. This is where we'll publish something as it goes into the master, into the main branch of your repository. I'll show what that script looks like to do the automation. It's pretty simple. It just says that we're going to use node 12 as our language here for running these things. We need to install a node. That's one of the requirements you saw in the CLI page that said you have to have node 10 or greater. Once I have that, I run the single command to install the CLI. I install a couple other things to help. And then down here, I get the API version from the file, and I run API publish, and I run API set default to set that new version as the default. The way that the CLI gets the API key is through an environment variable. And GitHub Actions provides a way to pass in secrets. You can go to your settings for the repository and set the API key, and that's available during your build run. So let's wire this all together. We will jump into SwaggerHub. We'll look at the integrations, and we'll set up a GitHub integration. I'll use GitHub Sync. Call this GitHub. This is going to use my credentials for what I've logged in as with GitHub. Gets a key. Pick the right repository, call this webinar. And you can push in a lot of different code from your integration. It's not just the API definition. You can generate clients and SDKs and push those in. I'm going to push in YAML unresolved, meaning that I'll leave in any of the references that are in the document. I'm going to call the output folder docs and leave the name. So now I've created this. I'm going to make a change here. And I'm going to sync this with my Git repository. This is one of the new features here that we've added. You can see that you can pull the changes and you can save and push the changes. I'll add a special commit here and save and push those changes into my Git repository. Everything was successful. When I look at the repository now, I should see a new branch. The first branch that I left the default as SwaggerHub. And when I look here, you can see that it's created a docs folder and it's created the swagger.yaml file. Anytime I push into the repository, it also kicks off a build. You can see the commit message, and we see here that the build was successful. And this is because the publishing and marking things as default only happens when it's on the main branch. It doesn't happen when it's on other branches. So really nothing is happening as I push into this SwaggerHub branch. What we'll do now is we'll do a pull request. This would be the part where you as a team or your development team would collaborate around any of the changes for the API and maybe include any development changes that need to happen as well, maybe code changes. After that all happens, after the review has been approved, this can be merged into the main branch. And at this point, it's going to kick off the action, and it's going to run the command for publishing and marking that version as default. The version we had was already default, but it actually wasn't published. And this command here is going to do that for us. Installing the CLI at this point, it's running the publish command, and then it does some cleanup at the end. I look back over here, I see that it says that this is unpublished. This is because I haven't refreshed. If I refresh the page now, if things work correctly, it tells me it's published. So you saw a full circle there. I made a change from within SwaggerHub, pushed it to my Git repository, and then from there, published it and marked it as default from my build pipeline. I want to show too how what happens when you start creating a new version. So we will create version 1.1. At this point, it's going to ask me if I want to copy the integrations that I have set up over. I have set up GitHub, and I can uncheck this or not to copy it over. This keeps my versions consistent and it makes it easy to do a new version. When I create this new version, it doesn't push it yet to my repository. I need to make some change to it. You can see here it's 1.1.0. I'll save this within SwaggerHub, change a new commit, and push that into my repository. This is really similar to what we saw with that initial push, but now I've created a new version. And one of the main differences here is that it's going to create a version-specific branch. And this allows me to, or allows the team to have multiple versions going on at the same time, maybe in different branches, so that you can use all the benefits of Git and make sure that you can merge changes between the versions and the different work that's happening. So the pattern is SwaggerHub -API name. you can actually have multiple APIs in the same repo, and the final is the version. I want to show quickly how we can make a change and pull that into SwaggerHub using the new pull feature. Add a note, this was saved within GitHub. I commit those changes. It's not here in this version because I haven't pulled it in, so I need to run sync again. I will pull these changes, and when I do, I see that it says it is now what was in the GitHub repo. One nice thing is we don't save at this point. We give you the opportunity to maybe make some changes. If you don't like what you pulled in or don't like what you changed, you can always revert to the last save that you had. I'm going to keep what we have here. At this point, it would be the same process, maybe another code review, another merge into the main branch. We'll start a pull request and start another code review, and finally merge that in. Before I do that, I want to just show that 1.0 is the default, and 1.1 here is unpublished still. The goal is once I merge that, 1.1 should also be published, but now it should be the new default. This kicks off a new build for us as we merge it in. Same steps, same workflow. Install the CLI, run publish, and run set default. We can see here the feedback says it worked, and let's refresh to see if it did. So now 1.1 is published and it's marked as default. So this whole process helps the team do the steps that you would implement in an API strategy, but do them in an automated way. I never had to think about, okay, now I want to publish this version and now I want to make this as default. That was already decided, that process, that workflow was determined, and I can automate that to make sure that every team can follow the same thing without the effort, without thinking about it. So as we saw here, I showed the CLI. There's lots of different commands I didn't show. I showed how you can push from SwaggerHub into your Git repo and then pull things back in as well, and run the CLI tool for your automation. So just kind of a refresher on that original diagram. Maybe this kind of puts a working example to this workflow here. We kind of saw each portion of this throughout this whole process. And like I said too, just to say about Code First, you could do the same process with Code First, and it would be a setup where your workflow, your process can be automated, so your Code First team can continue working the way that they work and push things into your central catalog automatically, and then give them the freedom to start maybe shifting toward a design first approach if that fits within your strategy. So kind of the big takeaway here, of course, is SwaggerHub as we're thinking about this API strategy, as we're thinking about helping it and enabling it, making changes to the workflow within SwaggerHub, and adding tools that you can use to build automation. We feel that SwaggerHub is a really key tool for that, a really key tool to help you integrate and automate